Welcome back. Panelists with us, our senior Washington correspondent here at NBC, Hallie Jackson, Eddie Glaude Jr., Princeton University, Stephen Hayes, the founder of The Dispatch, and Robin Wright, contributing writer and columnist for The New Yorker. All right, I'll quickly show some Biden poll numbers here, but I actually want to focus a little bit more on the war. But we're seeing here, Hallie, very quickly, it's one poll. It's the first one fully after invasion. I don't think this is a State of the Union bout. This appears to be the first of what could be the rally around the flag.
Post-Ukraine, right.
Post-Ukraine, job approval rating almost above water. His approval on handling of Ukraine now above water. Again, could be an outlier, but we may be in the middle of a shifting politics. With it being driven by Ukraine.
Based on what we're seeing on the international realm. I think you're right. It's one data point. We need more, right, before we start to extrapolate from it. Obviously, I think this is something the White House is not unhappy to see these numbers, although it's not their primary focus. The thing that has struck me is the way that what has happened in Ukraine, and we talked about this a little bit, is penetrating to people who might not otherwise care about political issues, right? This is something, the images, it is visceral. It is, front of the every single newspaper, even local papers and national newscasts every single morning and every single night. This is a different level than when we talk about some of the other internal political domestic agenda stuff that I think folks sometimes get a little bit lost in. I do think you're right. It feels to me more post-Ukraine than it does State of the Union bounce, and we'll see how the other ones come out.
State of the Union. Is anybody writing about it this morning? It is sort of amazingly lost. Robin, I was intrigued by the conversation I had with Admiral Stavridis about the Balkans. Because, I remember in 1994, 1995, we weren't going to go in with Kosovo and Serbia. We weren't going to do certain things. And the pictures changed public opinion. To Hallie's point, I mean, the world may push us to do a no-fly zone.
For the moment, that's not going to happen.
I agree.
There are too many calculations. Russia's war has never been just about Ukraine. It was always about the competition with the West. This is the one big question, of course, is where does Putin stop? And does he push, whether covertly or overtly, beyond Ukraine? And I think that's where you might see the United States taking a stronger position, setting up the kind of defensive mechanisms, challenging militarily any kind of Putin aggression. For now, they're not going to do that. But I think the real question is, can you change the balance of power in the air? And if you can do that, suddenly you change the dynamics across the board, whether it's giving the Ukrainians fighters so that it can take on those convoys we see outside of Kyiv, or whether it's providing Stingers and Javelin. That's really the critical next step.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is the administration doing everything it can do? And this goes back to the public opinion question. And people will be favorable to the Biden administration if there's the impression, as we watch this play out on our screens, on our phones, that the Biden administration is really doing everything it can. And I think there's a growing sense that they're not. If you look at what President Biden said on February 24th when he announced this to the world, said we are going to do something, we are going to be tough. He said Russia will be an international pariah, a pariah on the international stage. We're dealing with Russia on the Iran deal. We're dealing with Russia on climate. The State Department has given guidance that our diplomats can continue to deal with Russia. They're not a pariah. This is what happened after 2014. We said Russia will be isolated. Russia wasn't isolated. We need to do more.
Eddie, it does seem as if it's interesting. Is this Putin's war or Russia's war, right? And I do think there are some that are trying to create, hey, let's not punish the Russian people. But I don't know if I don't know if you can do that anymore.
Well, it's going to be difficult, right? War is war. I mean, we need to be very clear about it. And whenever war happens, everyday ordinary people who happen to live there will be affected, impacted. Right. So it is also important, I think, Steve, to kind of think about that President Biden is also dealing with a coalition of folks that are impacting the kinds of decisions he makes. Sure. And we were lauding him, celebrating him. We're actually building that coalition in order to do what we've done so far. And that coalition also provides certain kinds of constraints, restraints. And it's one thing for us to kind of go it alone, but it's another thing to understand that this is, in fact, a war that impacts the very ways in which the West conceives of itself. So he can't just simply be out there doing these things by himself.
I think it was clever at the beginning for the Biden administration to go public as quickly as they did with the intelligence that we were gathering. It was a smart thing. I think it was effective, not because it was a deterrent, but because it made clear that Vladimir Putin was lying about what he was about to do. Right. But it also created this gap between what he was saying, what the president was saying, what the administration was saying, in terms of the significance of this war, what it would likely mean, reshaping the way the Western world operates, and what we were doing. We were late on sanctions. We didn't initially sanction Putin. We were late on SWIFT. We didn't send the arms before the war that we're now rushing into theater.
To the point that you're making, too, and because I think it's important, I was so struck by Secretary Blinken. He clearly wanted to come out and make some news on the banning of Russian oil imports, right? That is the most that the door has been open.
But they didn't make the news.
They didn't do it, but the door is open to it more than it's been, and it's been a shift from the White House thinking and White House perspective.
Because Congress is going to pass this, and he's not going to veto it. So he's got to look like they got to come out in favor of it.
But the question is, are we just going to ban what the United States trades, or are we going to begin to sanction other countries and foreign companies that also do oil deals with the Russians? And if we don't take that second layer, the first layer is meaningless.
It's symbolic more than anything.
It's symbolic.
Purely.
But remember, last year, Putin made almost $120 billion off energy when the price of oil was under $70. Now it's $115. It could go to $150. And look, that there's still, even as we sanction him on oil, the rest of the world is still buying.
But to your point earlier, the question about where does he stop, we can affect where he stops. If we do this first, the Treasury put out a statement on Friday saying, yeah, we're not basically going to ban these banks. We're trying to create clarity in our own markets on energy. We're going to take these steps till the end of June. If we do this now, we can lead. We shouldn't be waiting to follow.
But should we take some solace in the effectiveness of the sanctions that Putin's calling them a declaration of war? You know, I mean, meaning like, oh, these really hit him this time. Yeah, this time it hit him. It's clear all the other sanctions never were that effective. These are effective.
And what you hear her talking about, the no-fly zone, he's concerned about it enough to be able to say that if that were to happen, it would be, crossing the line essentially into what he would see as a direct confrontation. He's listening and he knows what's happening internationally, right? Mm-hmm. There's enormous, you can raise the question of the pressure on him at home, right, inside Russia, given what you started your show with today, Chuck, and the crackdown on reporting inside Russia.
But there is something going on in the Russian army that at some point we've got to figure out, Robin, how can we harness this? Can we harness this clear? There's something, they're not in on this.
Chuck, how many movies have you seen about the plots against Adolf Hitler during World War II?
They don't work.
And none of them work.
I know that. I didn't say, I wouldn't go in there all the way.
And so, sure, there's likely to be some discontent. I mean, these are a lot of conscripts. They don't know what they're doing. They're lost. I don't think anytime soon we're likely to see any kind of challenge, whether it's by the people or by the military, that changes Putin.
Eddie, I want to talk. I joked about bringing up the State of the Union. It's like nobody else is talking about it.
Right.
But if there was one thing that surprised me about the President's State of the Union was the lack of connecting the fight for democracy and freedom abroad with the fight for democracy at home. Today's Bloody Sunday.
Right.
Okay. On Selma, Vice President's there, going to march across the bridge. The second time without John Lewis. Feels odd not to have John Lewis there leading this. But were you surprised?
I was stunned. I mean, it was an easy kind of rhetorical move. Let's defend democracy abroad and secure democracy at home.
And politically helpful. I mean, I hate to be that crass about it, but right? Like, it's an easy political message.
What would it mean to secure democracy at home? We would have to address the question of what's happening across the country in terms of the assault on voting rights. And we would also have to address the illiberal forces within our country that are driving the challenge to voting rights. So I didn't understand it. And I thought it was a mistake.
Well, and I think it's a way if we're going to get drawn in more, you got to explain to the American people why this fight matters. Anyway, and that would have been one way. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.